We're now pleased to take any questions, if there are any. And would you please identify yourself?
I'm right here.
Okay. I guess how did the idea of putting longer weight, higher weight trucks on the road get started? Who's pushing it?
Start.
I'll just say that.
The trucking industry has
Absolutely.
been pushing this forever. They always want bigger and they always want longer trucks. That's what they're in the business to do, and they have to be stopped.
Let me just say this, it's exactly what Joan said, that this is the trucking industry pushing for bigger trucks, and they're also pushing for people driving longer hours. Does anybody think that's a good idea when we know of people falling asleep? And they're trying to push these drivers who basically don't have a choice, and they want them to drive longer hours. They want to drive bigger trucks, and it's just about money. It's about greed. I mean, we're fighting the battle about Mexican trucks coming in. If we have these trucks problem with American trucks, can you imagine these unregulated trucks coming across the border and just, flooding the United States with unsafe trucks? This is a continuing problem, and the Teamsters Union finds itself battling the trucking industry because we're the ones that are standing up for safety for the American public and for our drivers. And the answer is we have to have standards, and the answer is, greed, and it's nothing but unwarranted greed. They can make more money, and you know what? They probably have some chart somewhere where they figured out what they will pay out, and they don't give a damn because it's all about money.
Yes, would you identify yourself?
I'm Michael Rose from the NAC Legal Report, and I will also address this to Mr. Hoffa also.
Okay.
I know that I've taken a look at the comments that have been filed on the Hours of Service Rule, and a lot of them are from independent truck drivers and the other independent drivers association, and some of them are very much opposed to the rule. So I was just wondering how you guys respond to that.
Well, I'll start, and then Mr. Hoffa can speak. We disagree completely with their position. The independent truckers want to take the most rushed jobs. That's how they get a lot of their business, on-time delivery. And they're willing to drive all night and all day. If there weren't any regulations, they probably would. And they do try and get away with it. Unfortunately, there are many more trucks on the road than there are enforcement agents. And it's very difficult, particularly without the EOBR rule, which would make this electronic, to do effective enforcement on the hours of service. And so while we do work with the independent truckers on some issues, on this issue we just completely disagree with them. And I just ask you yourself, if anyone in this room could tolerate driving 11 hours in a major truck. I don't know if you've ever driven a truck. It's very difficult. It's very exhausting and very stressful. And then work another 3 hours on loading and unloading, 14 hours a day. It's inhumane. And I think that many of you might also know that they're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. They have been since 1937. They don't get paid overtime. They get paid by the mile, which only encourages drivers for their own economic security to drive as fast and as many miles as they possibly can and to cheat on their hours of service. And then with the comic books rather than electronic onboard recorders, there's very little enforcement possible. And when a crash occurs, the person harmed and killed is usually the car driver. They don't have a voice when the police comes to try and write up, police come and try and write up the report on the crash. And the truck driver, who wants to maintain their job naturally, says it wasn't my fault, it was their fault, but there's no one to say. And often there's no penalty for the driver or for the company, and only those few families that decide to sue ever put the company to the economic test of having to pay out. So it's a skewed system that doesn't work for the American public, and all of those different areas that I just mentioned should be changed. Jim?
Well, I would just say exactly what was just said. I mean, this is a matter of, sometimes independent truck drivers, we certainly have many issues we agree with them on, but from their standpoint, if you own your own truck, I mean, the answer is to drive longer hours, to do as much as you can to make money. I mean, they've got tremendous obligations with regard to their truck, with regard to their, they've got to pay for their truck, they've got leases, they're buying the truck, and they come from a different world. And basically, it's the issue of regulated trucking and unregulated trucking. And obviously, they're under such pressure that they certainly will compromise the safety of our highways. And, they don't see it that way. They think, I have a right to make as much money as I can. And given their thing, they would drive forever, as long as they could. And the answer is, we all know that's not the answer. The answer is we have to have regulation. We have to regulate the size of these trucks, the number of hours, the amount of rest people get, and to that extent, we're the ones that will keep pushing those issues.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the press? Yes. If you identify yourself. They're not a part of the SHIPA bill. We're going to have a hard time getting the SHIPA bill passed. So we add those two things in there, and all hell will break loose. So we talk about it. We've actually talked to the Secretary of Transportation about it because we believe that it's really important for him to understand in the agency where he handles all the regulations we've been talking about, to understand the basic underlying issues and causes of these problems. I think we'd need a different Congress in order to tackle those issues. I've sworn before I leave the lobbying business that that's one of the things I'd like to tackle, but this is not going to be the year for it. We'd like to, but yes. I think it's only one previous Congress. Is that right? Yes. Yes. Just one previous Congress, yes. And we were just getting started. I mean, having worked on legislation many years, you don't always get the bill passed the first year. Well, no, actually, Congressman McGovern has 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats as the lead sponsors of his bill. So, yes, we're very interested in getting bipartisan support. All of the highway safety work that I do and Jackie Gillen does, and all of us, is bipartisan. Did you want to say something?
Well, there were more Republicans supporting this legislation in the previous Congress, in the 111th Congress.
Jim, why don't you come up here?
We had a broad coalition of support, and we had legislative language drafted. We had it in the bill that I reported from subcommittee in June of 2009. We were en route to doing much bigger things, but because there was no agreement on a funding mechanism for the future of transportation, the legislation did not move from either the Senate or the House. In response, though, to your earlier question about, and Joan's response was quite right, about limiting hours and whether you paid by the mile or by some other mechanism without time and a half or overtime. If the hours of service rule, which was established under the Motor Carrier Safety Act and by the Motor Carrier Safety Administration, is enforced, those issues take care of themselves. Because if the driver is limited, and if we have, in addition to enforceable logbooks, electronic onboard recorders, and the data is recorded in another place than as well as on the truck, then you have an enforceable mechanism, and the hours of service can be fully enforced. We did this with the railroad sector in the Rail Safety Act of 2007, which was finally signed into law in 2008 after 25 people died in California when a freight train and a passenger train collided. 25 people died. Suddenly, the Senate erupted and passed the bill that we had passed through the House. George Bush signed it. It put very rigorous limits. It was the first improvement, the first change in rail safety laws since 1907. But it's enforceable, and it is being enforced. And that is what Mr. Hoffa is asking for. Is in the contract negotiations that his union undertakes with the trucking companies, these are enforceable items. They're enforceable in your contract, but they're also in keeping with the law. So, and a rigorously enforced law will deal with the other issues that you raised.